The case file was opened in 1987, and it smelled like the inside of a camera that had been left in a drawer for too long, that specific chemical tang of old paper and dust. I know that smell better than my own shampoo, because I spent 3 years of my life buried in the Sheriff's Department of Hendricks County, Indiana, transcribing 50-year-old witness statements. My name is Dana Whitfield, and for the last decade I've worked as a cold case analyst for the Midwest Unsolved Review, a true crime podcast that's less about ghosts and more about spreadsheets. We're the people who pick apart the timeline of a disappearance over coffee that has gone cold, who cross-reference a gas station receipt against a credit card log from 1993. We don't chase shadows, we chase paper trails. The trail I started on in March of this year led me to a photograph that should not exist, and it is now the only thing I can see when I close my eyes. The case was the Graham Hollow vanishing. In the fall of 1987, a young woman named Alyssa Brandt went missing from her family's farmhouse on the outskirts of a town called Mineral Point. It's the kind of place you drive through on a back road and forget immediately. The Brandt family had been there for 4 generations, growing soybeans and raising cattle that never quite seemed to thrive. Alyssa was 24, a nurse at the county clinic, and engaged to a local plumber named Ray Milhouse. The details were textbook. She left church on a Sunday evening, drove home in her husband-to-be's pickup truck, and was never seen again. The truck was found the next morning on the gravel apron outside the barn, keys still in the ignition, a half-eaten apple on the driver's seat. The barn door was open, but there was no hay disturbed, no sign of a struggle. The local sheriff concluded she'd wandered off, maybe a case of postpartum depression, she wasn't pregnant, or a lover's quarrel that went sideways. Ray's parents refused to provide his alibi, citing a family trip to Minneapolis that they never had receipts for. But there was one detail that never made the papers, a detail that had been buried in the original investigator's field notebook. I found it while digitizing the archive. A handwritten note in pencil, smudged at the edges, dated 2 weeks after the disappearance. He interviewed R. Milhouse. He is a poor liar. He showed me a picture he says Alyssa took. The picture shows Alyssa standing in front of the barn, waving. The problem, the picture is dated October 14th, and the timestamp on the back in her handwriting says first snowfall. There was no snow on October 14th. It was 68 degrees outside. When I asked about this, he got defensive and said it was the date the film was developed. Pulled the film roll from the camera. The roll was new. The date stamp was a number stamped at the time of development. He says she must have used a different camera. He is a poor liar. I remember reading that note and feeling the first cold prickle on the back of my neck, the one that tells you the ordinary world has a hairline crack in it. I pulled a coffee, printed the field notebook page, and pinned it to my corkboard. That was the beginning. The photograph that Ray Milhouse showed the deputy in 1987 had never been admitted into evidence. It had been kept in a manila envelope in Ray's lawyer's office, and when the lawyer died in 1998, the envelope went to his son, who was an antiques dealer, and put it in a box of miscellaneous ephemera. The box ended up in a storage unit, and the storage unit was sold at auction in 2019. I found the photograph on a cold case enthusiast's blog 4 weeks ago. The blogger, a retired schoolteacher named Harold Previn, had bought the storage unit and was cataloging the contents for fun. He posted a photo of the photo, a scan of a Polaroid, grainy and faded. The caption read, "Random snap from 1987, look at the 80s plaid. Anyone recognize the barn? #auction find." I nearly choked on my breakfast. I recognized the barn. I'd seen it in the surveyor's photos from the case file. It was a distinctive red gambrel roof barn with a crooked cupola, and there was a faded advertisement for a local feed mill painted on one side in white block letters. Graham and Son, guaranteed stock seed. The photograph showed Alyssa Brandt. She was standing in the barn doorway waving at the camera. She was wearing a thick wool coat, and there was a light dusting of white powder on her shoulders. She was smiling. It was a candid shot, the kind of thing you'd take of your friend at a first snow. But here's the impossible part. The date on the back of the Polaroid, in Alyssa's own handwriting, said December 14th, 1987. And December 14th, 1987 was the day they found her pickup truck abandoned. That was not the impossible part. The impossible part was what was behind her. In the photograph, through the open barn door, behind Alyssa's shoulder, there was a field. And in that field, so small you had to know to look, was a man. The man was not from 1987. He was wearing a modern puffer vest, the kind with a high collar they started manufacturing in the late 2000s, and on his head he had a utility hard hat with a headlamp, the kind used by evictions teams and county assessors. And he was waving back at her. I sent the scan to a photographic forensics specialist, a woman named Dr. Lisa Ng who does freelance work for the FBI's digital imaging unit. She called me at 11 p.m., an hour she never uses. "Dana, I need you to listen to me carefully," she said. The sound of her voice was flat, clipped, like she was reading an emergency protocol. "That photograph has a true silver halide emulsion structure. It was developed in a chemical bath, not printed digitally. The dust specks are consistent with a 30-year-old camera. I ran a dye analysis. The green in the plaid shirt on the woman matches exactly the green on the feed mill sign, which means it's a single film layer." I waited, and the man in the background. There was a long pause. I heard her take a sip of something. "That's the problem. The man in the background has a depth of field blur that is consistent with the same focal plane as the background. He is physically in that field, but the pixel density of his vest suggests a fabric weave I've only seen on Arctic-grade parkas from the late 2010s. The headlamp design, single beam, three-point mount. That is a 2019 model, used by FEMA after the new Madrid earthquake drilling exercises. And his face? I ran a facial geometry match through a database of missing persons. It's not a match to anyone over the age of 40, but the facial structure matches a missing person case from this month. My blood went cold. Who? A 32-year-old land surveyor from Springfield, Illinois, named Andrew Delgado. He was reported missing on the 3rd. He was last seen on a job site near Mineral Point doing a boundary survey for a wind turbine project. They found his truck. The keys were in the ignition. There was a half-eaten apple on the seat. I didn't sleep that night. I drove to the Brandt farmhouse at dawn. The place had been abandoned for 3 decades. The barn roof had caved in at the back, and the cupola was loose, leaning sideways like a drunk man's hat. The feed mill sign was faded to ghosts of white letters on rust. But the barn door was strangely intact, still unpainted wood, still sturdy. There was a brand new padlock on it. It looked like the kind of metal lock you buy at a hardware store in 2019 with a keyhole and a rubber cover. I called the county assessor's office. The property had no active owner on file. It had been in tax lien limbo since 1990. No one was supposed to be there. But the lock was newly installed, and when I peered through a gap in the planks, I smelled something. It was the smell of rust and grease, and underneath that, a faint, sweet smell like old grass hay. But there was also a humming, a low electric hum like a transformer and faint light moving. I was not brave. I was a woman with a notebook and a podcast that had 40,000 listeners, but I had to know. So I picked up a rock the size of a cantaloupe and smashed the padlock's shackle. It snapped on the second hit. The door swung open with a groan that sounded like a ship's hull. Inside the barn, the floor had been excavated to a depth of about 8 feet, a huge rectangular pit lined with reinforced concrete, the kind you'd use for a fallout shelter or an underground parking garage. The pit was flooded about a foot deep with dark, oily water that reflected a single hanging light bulb that swung gently in the draft. In the center of the pit, standing on a raised concrete platform just above the water line, was a modern digital camera on a tripod. The camera's live view screen was on. The screen showed an image of the barn interior. It showed me. I was looking at the screen, and the screen was looking at me, and there was a 5-second delay before the camera's recording light pulsed. I realized then what I was. I wasn't a detective. I was in a photograph they hadn't taken yet. And as I stood there, I heard a sound from behind me. It wasn't a footstep. It was the sound of a heavy mechanical door sliding on tracks, and the hum grew louder, and a voice that sounded like Ray Milhouse, but older and cracked like dry soil, said, "You took the picture. Now you're in it." I spun around. There was no one there, but the barn door had shut itself, and the camera on the tripod had turned, its lens moving to face me directly, and the recording light was steady, solid, unblinking. I have not left the barn since. I'm telling you this story from the inside, from the concrete pit, where I'm standing ankle-deep in warm water that smells like rain on asphalt. My phone is at 12% battery, but it has a single bar of signal, which is impossible because I'm literally underground and the barn roof is metal. The camera is still running. It's connected to an external power source that leads to a cable that goes through a hole in the wall into the darkness. I tried to climb out. The pit's walls are slick with algae. The platform I'm on is the only dry spot. I can see the barn floor above me, but the angle is wrong. The exit is too high. But here's what I know now. I finally understand the photograph from 1987. Alyssa didn't take it. She was the subject. And the man in the background, Andrew Delgado, the surveyor, he wasn't from 1987. He was from 2019, like the camera. He was there because he opened the barn, just like me. The photograph of Alyssa wasn't taken in 1987. It was taken now. It was taken through the lens of a camera that exists outside of time, and the snow on Alyssa's shoulders wasn't snow. It was dust. The camera's battery is at 99%. It's charging itself from the earth. And in the reflection on the water, I can see a face behind me. It's not my reflection. It's a woman with dark hair wearing a wool coat waving at me. She looks like the photograph of Alyssa, but she's older, her smile is wrong, and her eyes are not looking at me. She is looking at the camera. The last thing I want you to know is this. The photograph the deputy saw in 1987, the one that didn't exist, it was dated for a Saturday. Alyssa's note said first snowfall because she saw the camera flash as she walked toward the barn. But the snowfall hadn't happened. It hadn't happened yet. It will happen tonight here in this pit with this camera. And I have one match left in my pocket, and I'm going to use it to dry the film reel that's sitting in a plastic bag on the platform next to me. Because I think it came from Andrew Delgado's truck, and I think it has photos of the last person who tried to escape. If you are listening to this and you have a tingle on the back of your neck, do not come to Graham Hollow. Do not look for the barn. Close the browser. Delete the file. And if you check the local missing persons report for Mineral Point, Indiana in a few weeks and you see a new entry for a 38-year-old podcast host named Dana Whitfield, please do not feel bad. But if you do, turn the photograph over. Look at the handwriting on the back. You didn't write it. I did.